Welcome to episode 85 of the World Builders Anvil. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I'm here today with my co-host, Michael Miller. And today's topic is part 3 on how to build a culture, the Buardrakkeniem Culture. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build.
Welcome back to the World Builders Anvil. My name is Michael Miller.
And I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
You put on your radio voice for today's...
Today I'll be talking very seriously like this.
That sounds like kind of like stuffy.
Maybe I won't pick a voice that I'll just randomly change throughout the episode.
Hi, welcome to the World Builders Anvil. Today we'll be talking about the Buardrakkeniem Culture. It's part number 3 in our series.
Yes. That would be really good. And then everyone's like, why do you keep...
Who's that guy?
Can
you just get rid of that guy?
What's that horrible Romanian accent?
It's Romanian.
That was English. No. I'm pretty sure it was Romanian.
That was his radio voice. You guys don't recognize his radio voice? I'm Casey Kasem. Today, Buardrakken's Top 10.
The top 10 hits in Buardrakkeniem Culture's history.
This is a long-distance dedication.
Okay, this one from Eric the Bard.
Was that from King's Quest? Eric the Bard?
I don't know.
I think that was a King's Quest.
No, there's actually a character in my world called Eric the Bard.
Really? I think there is an Eric the Bard from King's Quest.
There's the thing is, it's like he's a play off of Gandalf and the mage in the history of fantasy because they always have the big beards.
The big beard, the big hat.
And everyone looks at them as like the wisdom in the room.
Sagely, yeah.
And
tell me he's an idiot.
He's not an idiot, but everyone thinks he is because he's a pretty boy. He can't grow a beard, so people don't think he's wise. They just think he's a pretty boy, and they don't listen to him. So he has the great advice, and then people just ignore him because
he doesn't have the Gandalf look.
Exactly.
All right. So he's like Yoda, but he looks like the town crier. Or
pick some hot person in the world of pop culture and insert one because
Gotcha.
I'd say Taylor Swift, but he might not like that. Or maybe he would. I don't want to judge him.
You're really going to hammer that one? No, I'm not.
Yeah, in case anyone missed the implication there.
Yeah, okay. I think we all caught it.
Okay. So we're going to do a quick wrap-up on the history, and then we're going to start pulling out a few key elements of the Buardrakkeniem culture and talk about where they came from the history, which most of it was in the previous episode in part 2 of this series.
I'm going to call shenanigans on this. I don't think I've ever heard you do a quick wrap-up about anything. So, but yeah, I think the fastest thing you've ever wrapped up is maybe leftovers at a takeout restaurant.
Well, actually, I'm very fast at wrapping up food. But you're right.
Which is why that would be your fastest wrap-up as opposed to talking.
Yeah, when I talk, there's no real such... Yeah.
Okay, so for the first 42 minutes...
we're going to wrap up quickly.
It'll be a quick wrap-up.
But we really aren't going to go into the previous episode here. We're going to pick up with the orc migrations into the art. And
you don't want to just briefly say that we're covering mostly the migration and the forced migration of the Buardrakkeniem culture as they got to north. Is that fair to say that that's a
northwest
into the northwest area of
the continent?
Does the continent have a name?
Yeah. I just call it Gardul because that's all there really is.
Is it one?
There are some islands, but it's a Pangea.
It's Mesa. Okay, say that again.
Pangea. Which is what you would call Earth when all the continents
I know what the word means. I just wanted to make sure that the listeners heard you say it.
Well, I was explaining to listeners who might not know what the word means.
Well, they have Google. They can look it up.
Back to force them into Google. Last time it was my turn.
Pangea.
That's my voice change.
Pangea. So I'm Pangea.
Oh, bloody.
No. If I'm going to do a pepper pot or some sort of high pitch, then you have to do something different. You can't just jump into the same one as me.
No, I was going into bloody, Yorkshire.
I see. All right. But mine wasn't even a pepper pot. Like
Well, cool, gee, I could do a pepper pot if that's what you want to hear.
I realize
Is that
it's not very
Romanian?
good. Yes, that's all Romanian. So anyway, now we're getting into the orcs invading.
Well, I guess you would call it that.
Or is it a migration or is it an invasion? Do they know they're going into another territory that belongs to someone else?
Well, you're always going into a territory that belongs to someone else when you're migrating. But it's similar.
The question is, did they know?
Of course.
So, as far as they are concerned, is it a migration or is it an invasion?
Well, I think it's a perspective of propaganda, whether you want to call it a migration or an invasion. They probably would have called it an invasion.
Well, it comes from a place of perspective. If they're the type of people that believes, well, the world belongs to me, no matter where I am, it belongs to me,
yes,
then it would be migration.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're like, well, that belongs to them, but we're going to take it from them because we're stronger, then that's invasion.
Yeah, I think they probably would have thought of it as invasion.
So, but the bottom line is this is all the orcs moving into the Buardrakkeniem culture because we're still focusing on the Buardrakkeniem culture. Okay.
Yeah, because what would happen is first there are two major tribes of orcs.
Okay. In the same area?
They're migrating at the same time. There's a group which I call the mountain orcs sometimes. They're the Cambion orcs.
Do they look any different, or they're all?
They're a little bit more stout, a little more bow-legged, and a little thicker than the other version, the Ordessan, which at this time are probably not called that because they've not yet settled in the area that becomes known as Ordessa.
Odessa or Ordessa? Ordessa.
Ordessa.
Okay.
And, but there's one that was typically a little bit more on the plains, and they're kind of getting forced actually north. And then the mountain orcs, which kind of helped force the Buardrakkeniem to migrate the way they did, are now being forced out of the mountains towards the way the Buardrakkeniem went.
But why are they getting forced out of the mountains?
Same problem, the growth of the Aeskrii.
Okay.
So they've now grown up in the mountains, like, we want the mountains too. And the orcs like, okay.
Do the Aeskrii ever incorporate, I mean, I'm sure along the way there are certain cultures that get assimilated into them, but does it ever come to a point where the Aeskrii are more than just a human culture? Do they pull other races in? They
will if the participants know magic. Magic is a very fundamental thing to the culture, and if you want to be brought into the culture, you have to know magic. It doesn't matter how you do it, because we're talking about this a little bit, there are different ways to perform magic in my world, but magic is the thing that at the top controls the empire.
So basically, if they come across your territory, their intention is we're going to wipe you out.
No.
So
what they'll do is they will say, hey, you're the king, we're here, give us tribute and money so we can build up our area. And if you say no, they go in and they kill a whole bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And the ones that are left are like, okay, you're in charge. And you go, sure. And they're like, you will pay us this tax at this date.
Yeah.
So you can stay on your land.
It's a racket.
Yeah, it's an extortion racket. So you can stay on your land and live it. If you try and rebel against them, they will uproot and move you and split you up completely.
Split you up completely.
Okay. So what will happen is, if your culture would then rebel at some point, they would actually take all of the people and they would split up them into other cultural groups and try and literally wipe out your culture, but more through assimilation.
Right, yeah, because they basically just... How can you have a culture when you're an individual?
Exactly. And then they'll take other people and say, okay, these are now your lands and you can go work those lands. And guess every April 15th, I'm just rambling.
Yeah.
Every April 15th, we will come and, you will pay us and then we will leave. So
they don't stay there. They don't like...
They have a presence. So like there would be, essentially advisors to the local lords, but the local lords would typically be of the cultural group that was there originally.
Yeah.
So it's like, they didn't have the idea of let's assimilate everyone into Aeskrii culture. If you had magical power, they would bring you back and keep you. Mm-hmm. And if you did not, they really didn't want you.
They really didn't care.
Yeah.
So the Aeskrii are moving up the river and they get to the mountains. They figure they want that too. They're pushing on the orcs and the orcs subsequently start pushing back on the dragon.
Correct. So the orcs start moving up, and the first ones that come are the mountain orcs. They're a little bit closer. They head from this mountain range to the mountain range that sort of splits the arm of the world. There's a pretty thick mountain range that goes down the middle of it. And they start, essentially, they move from their mountain range and they start infesting this mountain range. And they kind of go up to where the Umlauten are, and they start fighting them, and then they start turning over and going across the mountains there. Mountains are very rugged. Think Himalayan style kind of height, sort of smashed in the middle of a landmass.
Are there a lot of other cultures up in the mountains? Other peoples up there?
No, these are very rugged mountains. So, and a huge area of the mountains are actually above the vegetation line. I don't remember what that's called, but
you have giants in your mountains?
No.
No giants. No mountain giants.
No, there are no mountain giants here. There are like creatures, and there are very sparse people, but the people don't live. These are very rugged, very ripped straight out of the earth kind of mountains. So they're not easy to climb unless there's a pass, which there are a couple major passes. They're very, very difficult to transverse. And even below the vegetation lines in a lot of the areas in the middle of the range, there is no vegetation because there's no light, or not enough light gets down that there's minimal vegetation. So it's not a great place to live. There are some important religious areas in this territory, but not a lot of people live here. It supports a very low number of people.
So you have like a mountain guru? Tell me there's a mountain guru.
There are many mountain gurus.
Man, well, I think that defeats the purpose of
thousands.
A bunch of them.
Thousands of mountains.
Oh, this one didn't tell me what I wanted.
Climb over to that range over there. You'll find Guru Pascal. He's over there.
Yeah, no, I don't do guru for warfare against orcs. I do guru for farming in swamps.
But I was told this was the range I'd find the warlord guru. Well, where's the warlord guru?
Yeah.
This took me 6 days to get here. I've only got like 1 day left of food.
5 mountains, 1 to the south.
Well, look, is there some place that I can get some food along the way?
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
There's a Chick-fil-A there already.
Places,
yeah.
Chick-fil-A?
And there's a Chick-fil-A there.
Okay. I don't support
Sounds
Chick-fil-A.
delicious. I support their chicken in my belly.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, now.
Seriously, though, are there mountain gurus?
Yeah, there are important religious places.
When you say that makes me think of like Himalayan monks.
Not really Himalayan monks, but there are holy areas. So I guess maybe, but just not like Buddhists.
Right? Yeah, that's immediately what
I mean. They will garrote
there,
you on top of a mountain somewhere to cleanse it. But
the what?
Garrote.
Oh, that is what you said. I heard you correctly.
Oh,
okay.
Yes. They will strangle you with a wire and then use your blood to cleanse.
So these are mafia monks, basically.
Mafia monks. Yeah, that's why they're doing it, because you haven't paid your extortion.
So it's more exactly. I was about to get to the racketeering.
So there is some problems from a religious standpoint to the locals.
We can protect you. You got to pay for us to protect you. We can protect you.
But now they don't do so well once the mountain orcs show up, because they're very apt to use the hills. They build villages up in the mountains. They usually will have.
Well, you're saying they. Are you referring to
the mountain orcs? Yeah.
Okay.
They will build small remote.
When the Aeskrii first starts pushing on the orcs, I would think the orcs would push back. Are they just dramatically outnumbered? Is that
yes?
Okay, all right.
Yes, it's one of those things where you're just not winning.
You're not going to win. Okay.
And it's the same reason the Buardrakkeniem left. There's just nowhere else to go. It's either be assimilated or leave.
Okay.
And so when the first wave of orcs come up, the humans start getting nervous, but they're staying in the mountains. They come out and raid, and there are problems, but it's more of a skirmish. A skirmish
level.
Yeah.
Small village. What's the one?
Feeding.
Raiding. Yeah.
So raid out of the mountains and then back up into the mountains, and good luck chasing them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when the second wave comes, which are more a steppe style culture, much the way the Buardrakkeniem had been hundreds of years before this, maybe even 1,000 years, and probably not that quite that long, but for several hundred years at least before this.
So
a very similar culture.
So this is long after the Buardrakkeniem.
They've settled. There are kingdoms, and most of them don't even remember the fact that they used to live in that fashion.
So just an oral history. They didn't have a written record of anything.
Correct.
All right.
And
just so that we're getting an idea of how much time is passing. I mean, we're on our third episode on this subject, but just to give the listener an idea of just
from a historic standpoint,
history, it's being covered. Right?
It's been several hundred years since the formation of the kingdom of Buardrakis, and that was several hundred years after the Buardrakken people started settling all over this area.
And how do they? Did they just give themselves sanction to call it a kingdom? Like, we've covered enough territory. We are now calling this the kingdom of Buardrakken. Or Buardrakis, did you say?
Buardrakis.
Okay, Buardrakis. So this is our kingdom. Like, someone just finally said, you know what? Let's organize this a little bit. You guys will have that area. You'll be a lord. You'll be a lord. This house will be a lord. You know what I mean?
Essentially, the way it happens is the house is built up before that.
Okay.
And then what will happen is one of the houses will garner enough power that they will be recognized as the people in charge of the area. So a little bit of both, where the lords start forming up with the people who have the ability to protect the land that they're on. And then they'll start gathering up the land around it. So to put it into sort of European ideology, you have this thing in England called counties. And called counties.
Counties.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you would have a couple counties would form a duchy. And a couple duchies would form a kingdom.
Right.
So it sort of gets to a point where they're sort of recognized as sort of this is the domain of one major lord. And, you know, they didn't really call him a king, but for intensive purposes, for English speakers, it was a king. Because it's the person who is essentially just a great lord.
So would the heads of these houses, these lords, or what it counts, or whatever you want to call them, would they all like get together at a meeting and say, okay, this year you'll be king?
No.
Or, so how was that decided?
Essentially, whenever a king would die, you would bring together the lords who were eligible to vote, and then they would elect the next king, and he would serve until his death.
Oh, okay.
It was an election for life.
Life election, okay.
And pretty much a lot of the powers you would associate with kings, and don't get confused, later on kings had a lot more authority than kings early on do, but the basics are all there. The ability to tax people, to set taxes, to start or defend one's nation. You could attack another nation, or you could defend a nation on the word of this one person. And once they had the authority, they could do it. There are some limits to the fact where if no one wanted to go to war and you try to push it, it would be a very bad war effort. And, you know, not very many troops would show up to support you. And because the gentry, the nobles of the land supply you with your army, there's no professional standing armies like in, like ancient Rome had professional armies, where back in medieval Europe, that wasn't true. You know, the king would say, we're going to war with France, and
who's coming?
Who's coming? Or you're all coming. And they all have to respond because they have an oath to the Lord. But, you know, maybe it's like, well, we send just like a handful of troops instead of, you know, we really want to go to war with France. Maybe we bring everyone.
Yeah.
So.
But our town contributed. You got 6 people here.
There's Bob.
Yeah. Bob's our best. I mean, he only drinks half the day, you know.
The rest of us are way too wasted to come right now. Yeah, but so that's how it works, and it's sort of this. It's a recognition among the local people that
even Bob fights his worst when he's sober. Fortunately, that very rarely
happens. We sent 2 kegs of wine with the guy. Yeah, he hates wine though. But yeah. So
the orcs are raiding the areas that are near the mountains. They're coming down the mountains, they're raiding, and then they're heading back up the mountains. Then they start bringing a bigger presence in.
Well, but that's actually the tribe. Now, to the perspective of the humans, this must be one mass coordinated invasion.
Oh, coincidentally, at the same time, the steppe orcs about the same time period,
because of in areas to the south of the inner sea. Aeskrii are starting to finally really push west. And so there's some orc steppe tribes on the edges of the deserts down there, which are now forced north to avoid being assimilated in the terms of the Borg, I guess.
No, I was about to say. I was going to make a Borg reference. But.
Yes. And so they start coming up, and they follow up the Camian orcs into the arm of the world, But when they come, it's much more like when the Buardrakkenims come. You have a very powerful, very large horde of mounted individuals who are very apt with the bow, who are very quick to strike, come crushing in through the mountain passes and saying, "Hi, we're here. Do you mind if we stay?"
These are the steppe.
These are the steppe orcs.
Steppe orcs, okay.
And so they follow in behind.
Now, I know I'm interrupting, but
that's fine.
But if I don't, you'll just keep talking.
Yes.
So when the steppe orcs arrive, and they're coming in with their steppe culture, they're on horseback. They've got great bows. They know how to hunt on the steppe, so hunting in this area is comparable, i.e., hunting/warfare. Have the Buardrakken at this point in time, because it's hundreds of years later, have they at least maintained some of their technological standing? Like, have they maintained their warfare knowledge of the bows and arrows that they used when they were on the steppe, going back 400 or 500 years at this point? Like, has that been maintained?
It's been maintained, and that's part of the problem.
But it hasn't advanced.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now, the orcs coming up have these rudimentary iron weapons. And in case you've never studied this, when iron weapon people come into contact with bronze weapon people, it's a massacre.
Which is higher, iron or bronze?
Iron.
Iron is higher.
Iron is higher, and
bronze is softer.
Bronze is brittle. It's harder.
Brittle. Okay.
So, and that's the problem, is it's a harder metal. So it's a good weapon. The problem is when you have a little bit more durable metal hit it, it has a tendency to shatter. And so the initial contacts, very similar to when the Siren came about, the orcs sweep over the entire arm of the continent. Kingdom of Buardrakis, the Republic of Lubble, all wiped out.
So is this where the majority, this is where Buardrakken people die? Like, they get wiped off the map?
They're not wiped off the map, but essentially a lot of the nobles are forced into submission to the orcs.
Okay. And now how many people strong are the Buardrakken people at this point, and how many people strong are the orcs from the steppe invading?
The orcs are actually smaller in numbers. So they're probably about half the size of the human population, but their weapons give them a huge advantage.
And they're motivated.
And in much the same way, they come pounding down in, and they're like, here we are. And but they don't have the numbers to control all of the area they conquer.
They can't cover.
So they're forced to start pulling in some of the Buardrakken people, some of their older nobles, the ones who didn't resist quite as much probably, who start taking up minor lord positions. And so the orcs sit on top of the hierarchy, sort of like your dukes. And your regional warlords.
And what about the communication between these races?
They pretty quickly after they come together, they can start communicating with each other. Different base languages, but you're forced to talk to people when you invade their land, unless you kill them all off, which is impossible. And they don't have the numbers to hold the land. And for the orcs, is like they move up here with the intention of creating a power base to fight back against the Aeskrii.
Okay.
Now, the problem is they can't control it, and the Buardrakkenims are largely a human culture. The orcish culture is largely orcish. So you start having some racial tensions mixed in on top of the cultural differences, like, we're not part of you, you're an orc. And you actually will start to see some orcs end up with the Buardrakken culture coming out of this. There are some humans that consider themselves Ordessa. So you see on both ends where neither of these cultures will be strictly humanoid, strictly their race afterwards. But as they come in and they set up their sort of structure, and they have kings that are all over the place, or they all in theory owe allegiance back to Ordessa, which is sort of this area where the orcs settle in. It's called the Plain of Clem, and it's sort of tucked in between mountains, kind of like Hungary that we were talking about earlier. This idea that some of the mountains are bigger and tougher than other ones, but it's roughly surrounded by mountains. It's hard to get to this area. And so they're like, this is the perfect place to set up our resistance against the Aeskrii. And so, but now with this human orc group of people, we start building up, and we're going to go back to war when we can with Aeskrii.
Now, the Buardrakken that have been in this area, they've been there for hundreds of years. So, do they even care about the Aeskrii at this point in time? Like, are they even aware of the Aeskrii? Like, a lot of these people may have grown up not even being aware that the Aeskrii are out there? Like, are they? Or
the majority of the people would not.
Okay. So the orcs come in and they decimate half the population. They come in to take over the area, and they're like, oh, by the way, this is a temporary staging point where we're going to go fight these other people.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buardrakkeniem are like, what?
Who are you?
Yeah, who now? The Aeskrii what?
Yeah. And the problem is once you start setting up the human lords, they'll lose their military advantage of the weapons because they need the humans with iron weapons to have the numbers to go fight the Aeskrii.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is they start arming the people who still consider themselves Buardrakkeniem with the same kind of weapons they have.
And now they can fight back on an even playing field.
Exactly. And so you have a struggle over several hundred years of where the humans, start reclaiming their land. And now the Syrian might be a little upset because they're kind of off in the islands now, sort of looking down and going, ha, 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 at the Buardrakkeniem, like, see, how do you like it? But then
because that's what the Buardrakkeniem did to them.
That's what the Buardrakkeniem did to them. But over time, you have this with the reconquest of the Buardrakkeniem land, and during it they form what's called the Kingdom of Gorbatas. And the interesting thing is, it's called a kingdom because that's what we call the old thing, and we're the same thing because but we have no kings.
So it's a kingdom, but no king. No singular empirical leader. There's a very limited figure, and we'll get a little bit more into this. Well, why don't we get into this now or whatever? Because that's it gets you the idea of where we're at historically. Okay.
And so we'll go into, instead of a king, they have this thing they call a Grand Knight.
Grand Knight. Okay.
And the Grand Knight is the commander-in-chief of the military, and that's the only authority he has. And there is a council, a small council of people who make the bigger decisions on the executive level. And that's essentially what they call princes. So the princes aren't blood relations to the Grand Knight. They are essentially really powerful dukes.
So getting back to like the house leadership, they're like same sort of structure?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's very much the same structure, except on top, and it's really an argument over semantics, and they're really just choosing different words because really the princes are all united informally in the military level, and the leader of that is called the Grand Knight. The princes are really kings. And so you have a series of kingdoms, or as they call them, principalities, because it's not a king.
Yeah.
And this
I'm not a king.
I'm not a king.
I'm a prince.
Those kings from Buardrakis were really corrupt.
Yeah. Oh, no, we're not going to go that road.
We're not going that road.
Princes. We're not a council.
We're just lords like anyone else. Give us that food. And
by the way, April 15th is coming up.
That's right. April 15th is coming up. Be ready. We will be. What it really is structurally are a series of kingdoms. Some are on the inner sea side of the mountains, and some are on the outer sea side of the mountains. So essentially, you have a big inner sea, much like Europe, and you have the big, thick mountains I've talked about before that go through the middle, where the mountain orcs are. The mountain orcs are still there. They haven't been beaten anywhere. They're really small in numbers, but it's just not worth going that way. And so over time, the two sort of divide, and Gorbatas ends up being essentially the stuff on the outer side of the mountain range, the further away from the inner sea, and the trading, because that's where the rich trading is. So they're on the outer side, a little bit more isolated from the rest of the world than everyone else. And when that split comes in, and Gorbatas literally splits into two pieces at that point, but it's very informally a kingdom, because the Prince of Climbfar, the Prince of Highwall, owns that principality like a king. And they are still elected in a republican form by the other greater lords of their land. The greater lords all elect who the Grand Knight is, and it's usually not someone from one of the big houses.
So the Grand Knight, he's just in charge of the military, and he kind of works in hand in hand with the council.
Yes.
And if he says, well, I want to go to war for X reason with X people, he can't do that.
No.
So when you say he's in charge of the military, he's just in charge of the execution of strategy, not the initiation of combat.
That's right. He cannot start wars. He can do a call to arms if there's an invasion, but
of course. So of course, yeah, for defense, of course.
But he can't say we're going to war with Odessa.
Okay.
Who never gets wiped out. However, they do get pushed back into their area.
At this point in time, is the Grand Knight an orc or a human?
The Grand Knight is a human. And the nobility, I would say, is probably 95% human. The population it's still probably 75, 80% human.
Okay.
There are a couple residual kingdoms that were around before there was the Kingdom of the Iron Hills, which must be what race kingdom?
I would think orc.
Iron Hills?
Iron Hills?
Dwarves.
Oh, dwarves. Oh, well,
yeah.
We all been talking about human and orcs, and based on the geography, I thought you were talking in the mountain range, so I assumed more mountain orcs.
And this is as they're coming in. There was a kingdom called the Kingdom of the Iron Hills. It's obliterated.
Okay. So they're all gone?
The remnants of the dwarves are pretty much taken down to the plain of Klim by the orcs, used to help construct their cities. Their major cities are actually mountains that have been hollowed out and transformed into cities. Rather than building stuff up from a plain or from a rocky area, they literally carved out cities from mountains. Not all of their cities, but their major ones. Then there's an elven kingdom that had been around too, and they get wiped out by the orcs as well. And their remnants are also brought down to the planet Klim to help beef up their ability to do certain types of activities there as well. So you start getting, and the orcs will call them free dwarves, free elves, because they freed them from their previousness.
You haven't been wiped out. You've been liberated.
You've been liberated. Of course, your races are dying, but hey, whatever.
Did you ever play for the PlayStation 2? I've been on the Xbox. A game called Freedom Fighter.
No.
It's a great game called Freedom Fighter that really, very easily and it really neatly illustrates the concept of liberation.
Mm-hmm.
When an invading army, and they are invading, they're not liberating anything, mm-hmm. they're invading. So the story of the game is that Russia has invaded the United States, and you play you're a plumber. The irony is, I think they did it as a joke. Your character is a plumber and with his brother. So I think they're making a Mario Luigi joke there. But you're just a plumber, and you get wrapped up in the fight is all these troops, like way more than like a Red Dawn scenario. Like it is a massive. It's like the opening of the game, they are invading New York City. Mm. So you imagine what it would take to invade New York, to successfully invade New York City, and subsequently the entirety of the country.
Yeah.
And what the first thing that they do is they take over the news stations, and they install a Russian newscaster, mm-hmm. and she starts broadcasting, via, the government's just feeding her information, like, this is what you're going to broadcast. And it's like, you poor American people with your corrupt government, we're here to liberate. We're here to save the American people from the corrupt, establishment of American government. And that's throughout every time you go through a level, that's what comes up. And you're watching it like, I've seen newscasts that look like this. So it kind of really opened my eyes up about when they say, oh, they've been liberated. Like, no, that's right. They were invaded. They weren't liberated at all.
It's perspective and propaganda.
Yeah.
Usually if you're invading, you're not liberating. But look, when we invaded Iraq last time, we're liberating them from Saddam Hussein. That was the argument.
Right.
That this guy is so crazy, we have to finally get rid of him. And whether or not it's true, it's perspective. And the thing is, in successful wars, the populace buy it enough not to fight back. Mm. And that's really all you want. You want them just not to open revolt against you. Or you end up like the orcs where you get pushed back, especially if you don't have the numbers to dominate.
In our case, we normally have the numbers to dominate.
Yeah. Or the numbers plus technology to dominate, at least the battlefield side of things.
Right. So the orcs come in, they've taken over, they've integrated into society. Now you've got a new structure involved. Still mostly a human government hierarchy.
In what's called the Kingdom of Grabadas. There's also the Kingdom of Odessa at this point. That's a different kingdom. There is a city-state called Saris to the south, which is, we will call it wizard rule. It's not related to Aeskrii, but they supposedly have a wizard king who's lived for thousands of years. Who
is that true, or that's just what they believe?
That's what the people there believe. That is the story that is told. The leader's been there for several thousand years. No one would argue it to the person's face.
Okay. But it's possible it's been a bit different dude that it's been passed along.
Maybe. It could be. But
to get the true answer, when Jeff's book comes out,
it's actually not involved it's not involved in the book, so actually I'll spoil that story.
Okay.
Essentially, it is a dragon.
It's a dragon.
It is a dragon.
Okay, so it is an entity that is thousands of years old. It's just not human.
It's just not human.
Oh, okay.
It takes human form. I don't know much you know about dragons in my world. They are...
I know a little bit.
Because I don't use them a lot because they are uber powerful.
Yeah.
And essentially...
I don't think we ever ran into a dragon in any of our adventures in the world. Because for half a second I was like, yeah, we did. But now I remember that was in Mike's world.
There were a couple times where dragons were involved. I don't know if they were in the stories. Like, I know in the Theater Troupe there was no dragons.
Yeah, I know there wasn't in that one.
So I don't think you've ever run into them.
I don't think so.
However, the idea is, one, they are cursed. And they have a couple curses. If people see them in the true form, the whole idea of dragon fear, which is common in stories, right? But this is a dragon fear that will build up resolve over time to get people to want to kill you.
Okay. So they don't want to be in their standard form, their natural form.
No, not if they're around people. However, people will, no matter what form that you're in, will always be uneasy around you.
Even if you seem perfectly human.
And you can't quite, because one of the major flaws they have are they can change their body size. They can change the volume of their body. But one of the few limitations they have, they cannot affect their mass.
Really?
Really.
So I would imagine that they would just have to be living on a mountain all the time then, because, what could support their body weight? They would be leaving massive footprints everywhere they walked.
But they have very strong magic. Usually what they do...
Oh, they'll use some magic to...
It will look like they're walking across the wooden bridge.
But they're floating just above it.
Just above it, exactly.
The king demands a stone road between him and every step he makes.
You just got a mass group of masons laying down huge plots of pavement wherever the king wants to walk.
And you do not ever want to get punched by one in uniform.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it would look like you were playing Mortal Kombat against...
You just punch you and you explode.
Yeah. You'd splatter. So, but that's actually technically a Syrian culture. One of the few that...
I mean, we're totally segueing here, but you're piquing my curiosity. So if there's this dragon running a human culture there, okay, why? Why does he feel the need to be in charge of a human culture?
Do I want to give that secret away?
You don't have to. I mean, if this comes up in the book, then I don't want to spoil it.
No.
But it might be in a future book. No.
It might be in a future book, but it's really a secret about the dragons. And I don't think I'm ready to give that secret
away. That's fine. You don't have to.
I'll tell you later.
I don't want to press.
But yeah. So essentially you have that kind of culture down there. Over time, the kingdom of Gabatis is really an alliance of kingdoms, splits into two parts. One along the inner sea, which does a lot of trading with the Shiftarians and other cultures over the sea.
I remember that name too, the Shiftar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that was a major, Mediterranean style culture, very much based on the Romans, and the Byzantines, a little bit of both, which is really redundant. But very big into commerce and invasion and stuff like that.
Liberation.
Well, that's
their move was decimation.
The irony was that I don't know if it ever changed at the end of the empire, but through all of the time where Augustus and Julius Caesar, Rome had never fought an offensive war.
It was always defensive.
Always defensive. Now, that's what their story was, and they won. But, it's like this little, from a defensive standpoint, went to control all of Italy, North Africa, France, parts of England, Spain, Germany.
Defensively taking over a long territory.
Exactly. Oh, someone came over and raided us.
Oh, they picked a fight. Well, we'll have to take all their land.
Exactly. Okay. So it's, but it kind of goes in line with being liberated. They, never fought an offensive war. They would go back. These horrible people are doing something brutal to that's the whole argument. That's why they invaded Britain, was because the Druids were evil. The Druids would do bloodletting and all these horrible sacrifices. And then, one Britain would, raid, and this ended up 4 legions to England. So, but yes, that was always a story. We'd never fight an offensive war. The whole Carthage thing, we took over all of their land defensively. But there's also always an argument, too, that there's really no such thing as a defensive weapon. The idea that even a Patriot missile battery, which seems defensive in nature, that, you're shooting missiles that are flying towards your cities, seems defensive. But the fact is, once you have that advantage over your enemies where you can shoot down their weapons coming in at you, that frees up your other troops to invade them. So it does give you a different kind of advantage. But you have this Grand Knight structure, which really, I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 principalities in the Kingdom of Gurbatus at the point of the story. There's a few more that peeled off and became independent, but they have their own loose confederation as well, too, where there's even less of a centralized authority than the Grand Knight.
Does the Grand Knight stay the Grand Knight for life?
No.
How?
A decade. They can be reappointed, and they often are if they're in the middle of a war, but rarely otherwise. It's a good way for a family without name or fortune to maybe get that. Mm-hmm. But the problem is you lose your lands. So
being a Grand Knight,
the cost is your lands. Now, it might be left to a child. It's not necessarily gone from your family, but you cannot own lands beyond. There's a certain designated area, which are your lands, which helps feed and there's a lot of excess. It's good land, but it's only yours while you're Grand Knight. Mm. And so most great lords aren't willing to give up their title to become it. Mm-hmm. And usually if they are, it's a sign that there's something bad about to happen, because they're probably going to make a play to be elected Grand Knight for life.
Or like, set me up to be Grand Knight. You guys vote on the war, and I'll excise the war.
Yeah, and there are definitely points in history where there's corruption here too. But really, the power resides heavily in the princes, who in their principalities are essentially elected kings, just the way it was in Buardrakkeniem. But it's completely different.
No, we're not kings.
And to the point where there's this idea of your birthday is called King's Day. So you have a King's Day, and on the day you were born, the anniversary of the day you're born, on the anniversary of the day you were born, you celebrate your King's Day, and there's a little song that gets sung, and there's a little crown that's put together, and every peasant gets it. Everyone, is king on that day. Okay. But there are no kings. Mm-hmm. But on that day, you are king, and you have no authority and anything. But it's the way they celebrate birthdays. You are the king of your family for that day. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you still don't tell your parents what to do, but you get to wear a little crown on your head, and it might be a really bad crown, or it might not be any actual physical crown, but it's the way they celebrate birthdays there. And it's a remembrance of the old, but in a way it's a disregarding of the old, saying, oh, no, kings are bad. But our prince, oh, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
So, because the princes are the ones, if you read the history books of Gurbatus, will tell you how they were the ones who were trying to stop the corruption of the old kings. But the old kings wouldn't listen, and that's why the orcs took everything over. So it's it's about how do you come back from a horrible, embarrassing defeat.
Claim victory and pull out.
And pull out, that's right.
Claim victory and fall back, even if you've lost.
That's right. So that's one of the major things. That's like a quick takeaway from the Buardrakkeniem part of the thing, was this idea of no kings, and it's very important. And if you ask there's no king here. There's no king. Mm-hmm. Kings are corrupt. Kings are bad. But they're in a kingdom, and it's very much a feudal society, no better than what it would have been if the kingdom had probably never fallen. But it's definitely that's an ingrained thing into the culture. There are no kings.
So does the original intention? Now, how I'm going to ask like a couple of questions. Let me ask one that I want a short answer for, just so that I can ask the follow-up.
Okay.
About how much time passes between the orcs coming down the mountain, the steppe orcs coming into play? They came at roughly the same time.
Yeah.
So all these orcs flooding the Buardrakkeniem kingdom before that becomes all like prince ruled and councils and Grand Knight. How much time passes between that and then, how much time passes between them arriving, the orcs arriving, and then all this cultural changes and set up where the orcs' original intention was to come in, create a staging area to build up an army big enough to go back and fight the Aeskrii.
So essentially, about the point where the orcs are broken.
Like, do they basically do the orcs maintain the focus that their original intention was to create a base camp? Of course not. Too much time.
Too much time has passed.
So Jeff is nodding no, just so that you guys are aware.
So essentially, I mean, pretty much by the point that they've taken most of it over, the idea is we're here and we're ruling.
Yeah.
And we're not going anywhere.
So they don't bother with their original intention to go back and fight the Aeskrii. They've established a new lifestyle, and this is good for us.
It seems like a really great lifestyle.
Okay.
So the problem is they really overreached. And they did not have the population to control nearly what their ambition was.
Mm-hmm.
And they paid the price for that ultimately as the weapons evened out. And they collapsed back to control the size of their population could control. And to give you a time frame, it's probably about 500 years.
Okay.
From the time they arrive until the time where, not the exact borders, but essentially where the orcs are and the Buardrakkeniem culture is, where those borders kind of end out. It's probably about a 500-year period.
And are the
which is actually pretty quick.
Are the Aeskrii still an oncoming threat?
Oh,
yes.
They are coming.
Okay, all right.
And at this point, around this point, the kingdom of Gurbatas splits in half. And essentially the people on the inner sea become the Confederation and the people on the outer remain the kingdom of Gurbatas. About that time, Shiftar is suddenly just blown off the map, and the Aeskrii have stepped into the city of Shiftar, and all of a sudden they're starting to, all along the other side of the inner sea, just the Aeskrii are starting to become everywhere. And the rumors are they're coming up the arm of the continent. Here come the Aeskrii. Any day now, we're going to be at war with the Aeskrii. So at this point, from the point where the orcs came in, and people in the area probably weren't thinking much about them anymore, to the time where Gurbatas splits in half, there's, oh my God, there's this massive power sitting on the other side of the door waiting to come in. So that's a huge formative 500-year period.
The Aeskrii Oracle. Yes, Jon Snow, thank you.
Yes, they are coming. This winter.
Yes.
No, not winter. That's a lawsuit. No.
No. It was not during winter.
The summer invasion.
They are warm people.
And they're not undead. Which is an advantage.
Well.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's an advantage to having an undead.
Count Dracula's like...
Yeah, well, all my soldiers, they're all dead.
So another major part that sort of comes up in this area is the idea of trade becoming...
See, now you're making me want to spoil Game of Thrones. You're always the one that wants to spoil Game of Thrones.
Guess what happens?
No.
They all die.
Jeff, stop it.
Everyone.
Okay. They always say, like, every time Martin gets bothered about when the next book comes out, he's like, you guys keep bothering me, I'm going to kill another Stark. Every time you bother me, I'm killing a Stark.
That would be good. I don't know if you get charged for extortion for that.
I'm sure you could. And I'll bet look, he's probably already sitting on a mountain of money, but...
I think we do a class action extortion suit against him.
Do you know that he has the distinction of being the very first Comic-Con attendee?
Really?
George R. Martin. He was the first person in the door. He's literally the very first.
Of the first Comic-Con.
Of the first Comic-Con. I think it was like 1964 or 67, something like that. He was the first man in the door. And there's actually, he famously claims that, and it's been proven.
Oh, wow.
But you can also, like he says, I'm the first comic book fan.
Yeah.
But he also, you can look in old issues of Marvel Comics where he wrote into Stan Lee and Stan Lee responded.
Okay.
Like, how cool is that? Like,
yeah, that's very cool. Yeah.
George R. Martin writing into Marvel Comics.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
So,
but now we kind of want to go over a few more sort of key things of the Buardrakkeniem culture. So we'll shift back there for a second.
Okay. I had a question, but I'll let it go.
Yes, let it go.
I'll let it go.
So, and we covered this a little bit in the last one, so I'm not going to go over it a lot, is this idea of the dual religions. Mm-hmm. The Kirk sort of lunar-based religion of the Sirens that remained when the Buardrakkeniem people took over, and the Buardrakkeniem paganism, which also came with them, very much dominates the region, and sort of a newer version will kind of grow out where it kind of merges the two together.
Mm-hmm. And didn't you say before that they're more of a solar-based worship, not a lunar-based worship?
But at this point, they're probably they're both.
Now, but I'm talking like when they first came to the region.
Yes, we're one, it's all about the sun, and the other one, it's the moons or the cycles that, make the universe go. Now it's very much, there are both. Yeah. And a new religion will form up from that, actually. At this time, sort of the reformed version of the old paganism. Scientology will take over.
Okay.
But I'm not going to go a lot into that again because we talked about a lot of that in the last episode.
Okay.
But the other thing is, with this growing throughout the Aeskrii, is this desperate seeking for trade partners. These people where you can work together to try and overcome this greater threat. Because it's like, at this point, the Aeskrii is so big, like, how do we stop them? We can't. And so there's actually a rebel faction of Shiftarians. The actual Shiftarian emperor, for a temporary time, relocates to the city of Kleinfar.
Do they know anything about like the Aeskrii? Like, they're confident that the Aeskrii are coming and they want to conquer?
And they want to conquer everything.
Okay.
And at this point, it's sort of like, it's like you live in a house and like you bring in a roommate, and then all of a sudden he starts bringing friends over, and before you know it, you're trapped in your room, and they're all sitting outside the door. That's the scenario they're in. It's like, not only are you sort of in one room, it's like they're right outside the door, and it's imminent.
Yeah, and there's nothing much you can do because...
And now our kingdom is just split in half. We have to find unity. So
that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And that's very much how they felt. And so what happened is there was the Emperor of Shiftar actually fled. He wasn't completely wiped out. He actually sets up in the city of Kleinfar for a while, temporarily, which was a huge thing to boost the technological knowings of the Buardrakkeniem people, because Shiftar was more advanced in different kinds of, especially in urban architecture, stoneworking, things that weren't traditionally important in the area, because the Buardrakkeniem were always wood was very important because it was a holy material. They started learning more about stone and building better defenses and how to breach through stone defenses. So they actually get a huge boost from this temporary relocation of the emperor.
I assume the emperor brings a whole bunch of people with him. It's not just him.
It's his entourage, but they're trying to form up a rebel army to help fight the Aeskrii. So he's trying to reform a couple legions. So he has a lot of people in this area. And there's some tensions at that time, too, because there's like, wait, why doesn't he just turn on us? But the thing is, he's very focused on retaking his home.
Yeah, and also he's got to realize, like, what's the point? Because there's this much, much bigger threat.
Yes. And there's,
even if he takes over this area, that's great. It's still only a matter of time before the Aeskrii get there anyway.
Yes. And it also brings this idea of trade and the importance of trade. And the Shiftarians have been very heavily into trade for a much longer period of time, where the Buardrakkeniem were very inner-focused. And that coming from the idea of settling in and then being protective. But they start getting this idea of how important trade is. And so they start learning about all of these trading partners the Shiftarians have, a lot of them who've also now been conquered by the Aeskrii in different parts of the world, and starting to try to cobble together almost a major rebellion all over the Aeskrii Empire, and an invasion of the Aeskrii Empire to happen, not simultaneously, but all of this stuff needs to happen to bring down this massive empire. And so that starts to get wrapped in as a very important thing as well, too. The idea of states become ingrained at this point, too, where this is Shiftar's land. And maybe we take it over at some point, but this is our land, that's their land. The Aeskrii have taken over the Aeskrii don't have any land. But, because they've taken over everyone else's. But, this idea that this part belongs to Kleinfar, and so if it's ever taken over, it would still be the, Principality of Kleinfar. It would just, maybe have a different government. But the idea where actual borders start to exist, beyond what they happen to be at the time, this is the traditional land of the Buardrakkeniem, this is the traditional land of the Shiftarian. It really becomes settled at this point of what land belongs to whom.
And everybody agrees on those borders.
Well, no.
No.
But, they agree to a stance like we're invading your land, but we might take it from you, but it's still, we will accept it structurally as a new providence into our empire or whatever later on. But it becomes more ingrained on where people are settled at this point, at least in this area of the world, is considered their land, even if they're not there in 50 years or 1,000 years. Maybe that a culture's gone, but there'll be an imprint of them left on that land, through what it's now called or whatever going into the future. So there's a permanent imprint happening on, this is France, this is Germany, this is England, and they will always be that no matter how they change, no matter how different they are. It will always be England. It will always be France. It will always be Germany. So this idea of settled, comes from their movement into the land. So that's taken from very early in their history. That the importance of purple grass is actually something that comes along with that. Like if you can have purple grass here where it doesn't seem to grow very well, that's like a tremendous show of wealth. Like you can afford to have purple grass. Ooh.
I was going to say, I still don't get the cultural importance of it, other than the spiritual / religious connotation with it.
It is the spiritual religious because
that's all it is.
Because essentially,
but then obviously, like you just said, it becomes like a social economical, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a status symbol of
having wealth.
Yeah,
and it ties back to a religious idea too, where the mythology of it was the great god Drak, who brought the people to this area of the world on his fiery chariot of doom, which led them to gave them all of this land. When he brought them up, it was from where Khansad and the giants were battling back in heaven. So it's extensively heaven. So there's a war in heaven, and he takes some of the people who he likes onto his chariot, and he flies them over to this part of the world and drops them off and says, here, this is all yours. Now, that's not what actually happened, but that's the mythology behind how their people showed up here.
And when they landed there, did they land on purple grass?
No, they left. Heaven was purple grass.
Oh.
That's where they came from. The old homeland. And it was in their psyche somehow, but that was sort of the fields, the steppes, the dominant color there. So that's why the purple's important. And that's why it's a status symbol here, because it's not purple grass here. So like the idea of having this purple grass is really cool. Missing the point that out, east somewhere there's a huge honking field of it.
Right.
Hey, you forget stuff over time.
It's been like 400 or 500 years. So
at this point, it's probably been 1,000.
Okay.
So it's been a really long time, and they didn't have writing when they came. They had language, but it was still forming a lot at that point. So, but that's sort of the bits and pieces that we're bringing together. So, to hop right into the world building task for the day is.
Well, I want to make sure. Do you feel complete? Because this is episode 3. This is the last episode of the Draken Wrap Up. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable. You've put everything out there that you wanted to for this.
I think so. The thing is, there's so many more things. Like I could bring in like every little belief they have and sort of go back historically. Mm-hmm. But I figure the 4 here, they're major fundamental things for them, and where they came for is probably enough.
Okay. Well, to tie a knot and put a pin on it. Put a pin in it. What? Say 3 things do you want the listener to walk away with knowing about the Buardrakkeniem culture? Give me like 3-sentence wrap up. Like, I want you to know this thing, this thing, and this thing.
Well, I want you to know that 1, it went from a culture that was a nomadic culture to a settled agricultural culture, who adopted a lot of the ideas of how to farm from the people who they conquered the lands from. Who liberated, yes. And then later on also gained a lot of problems or a lot of new ideas and thoughts from the orcs that invaded in. But ultimately, this growing thread of the Aeskrii kind of cemented the idea of what it was to be the Draken.
Okay. So, world builder task for the day.
World building task for the day is to go back into the history of your culture, which I'm sure you did after the last episode, and to pull out a few things, a few beliefs that modern culture should have as a remnant from the days from before.
So like a holdover belief from the days of old.
That's right. There used to be white elk, and we ate and killed all the white elk. But now if you can get a white elk, it's a holy thing.
Yeah. What is our real world task for the day?
I want you specifically.
Me.
You.
Me.
And everyone else who's listening. But we'll say you as in the generic you. The generic.
The royal you.
Mike out there.
Okay, Michael.
Out there.
Out there.
But
so you might go by Mike.
You might go by Mike, that's right. But to go in and look at the culture you belong to, like I'm an American, you're an American.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to take like a certain ethnic variation of that, but look at your culture and say, here's where we're at today. Here are some major things about our culture. Can I look back into the history and find out either where did it start or where did it become important? Because you probably never really find the starting point, but you'll find where it became important. Like obviously like democracy and the modern form of the American government kind of came in when, we beat the British and we created the Constitution. Before that, it didn't really exist as such. Even though there were some variations out there, but take your culture, find some major things about it and go back into the history and find out where did it become part of the culture's mainstream? Like, what is common law? Why is that important today? What's natural law? Why is that important today? Are they different? I don't know. Those are words.
But you sounded so intelligent for a moment there.
I don't want to sound too intelligent, but those are things that are actually very formative on our modern legal system. Mm-hmm. Go back and find out why those are important and just take apart your culture a little bit and realize that it's not a function of what's happening today that makes you. It's, you are a sum of all of your actions that get you to this point, plus some probably.
Plus some. I would be remiss if we didn't remind everybody, if they want to help support the show, they can go to www.garduel.com/Amazon. It'll take you right to Amazon. It's just a way to get there, and it'll help the show. Anything you purchase that way will kick back towards Garduel. So if you like programs like this and upcoming programs as to yet be teased, I will have a show coming up. I know Jeff and his lovely wife, Kristen, will have another show coming up. Mm-hmm. And these are just the start of the network. So if you want to see more programming like this, then please go to garduel.com/Amazon and do your purchasing as normal.
Because the great thing is it will not cost you an extra dime.
Not a thing.
Not a thing. But then from there, we will go straight into the tease.
Oh, I love being teased.
And now we've talked about building a world. We're going to talk about destroying it.
Yes.
Slow.
Was I supposed to get that excited about apocalypse?
I do. Yes.
All right, cool.
Yes. We want to now blow up the world you've created.
Yeah, we want to destroy it all.
Destroy it all. And
some men just want to watch the world burn.
And this was really inspired from Fallout coming and being a post-nuclear apocalyptic world.
You want Fallout here?
No. I heard about it and it inspired this episode.
I think some of the listeners might already.
And if you could send me a
huge love for Fallout.
And if you can send me a Pit Boy.
If there's an extra Pit Boy lying around,
let me know.
Yeah. Jeff could use all of the Pit Boys. Just send me all of the Pit Boys. So the teaser is the apocalypse of your world.
And
apocalypse.
I like apocalypse.
Apocalypti? What would be?
Just apocalypse.
I mean, obviously you could say apocalypse.
No. I like apocalypse.
I think apocalypse sounds pretty funny.
It's completely wrong.
There'll be lots of. Well, actually, if you really want to break it down, an apocalypse is the singular end of a world.
The apocalypse.
So how could you have apocalypse? Because
you could.
No, you couldn't, because one apocalypse will have ended the world. You can't have another one because it's already over. There's no world to ruin.
Wrong.
How is that wrong?
Think about this, right?
All right, go ahead.
If you were in the Roman Empire near the fall, the fall of the Roman Empire was an apocalyptic event. Learning was thrown out by the barbarians who took over. A lot of the idea and knowledge all lost. Your life completely changed. If being learned,
it doesn't sound like an apocalypse to me.
Because you don't live there.
Right, but this sounds like a cultural dark age, not an apocalypse.
You say tomato, I say tomato, but the thing is, the length people lived shrunk dramatically. Warfare was everywhere. It was total chaos when it was collapsing. It was horrific blood, just gore flying around. Horrific scene. So for the people who lived through it, it was apocalypse. To us, it's history. Okay, now, so that's not the kind of apocalypse we'll be talking about.
Oh, it's not?
No, we're going for the big stuff.
You're going
the stuff you're thinking about.
Okay, because I was about to change the tease. I was going to say so that the listener should be thinking about things like what you're talking about.
No, absolutely not. No,
we are talking about world-ending events.
Like small groups of things. Small groups of people survive. A zombie apocalypse or a disease or
meteor,
alien invasion.
Okay.
Any kind of way we can think of to do like 99% wipeout.
Okay. But there'll still be something left over
to start growing again.
Recruit it.
And then in theory, over time, when it builds back up and you have the next zombie apocalypse, you still have apocalypse. Just not concurrently. It's bad luck, but I
think you can only have apocalypse if you're discussing. If you're having it's like, it was horrible. We lived through multiple apocalypses. There was a bunch of apocalypse. No, I think it's only when you're saying, well, if there was 14 apocalypses, so I've got 14 planets out in the solar system. They all suffered an apocalypse. So we're talking about the apocalypse.
Well, because the world never really ends, or else it'd be a very boring story.
I guess.
Because, if no one survived, what's the story? The rock sat there.
Well, yeah, but it's still a story.
The rock is sitting there still.
Yeah, it's a still rock. There's a lot of sand.
And there's another rock 4 feet over, and they don't interact because they're rocks.
See, when you said rock, I thought you were referring to the entirety of the planet as a rock. You're literally talking about a rock out on the plain.
Yes.
It's just
a little pebble.
Yeah, there's a rock. And there's another rock. There's a rock over there. In about 1,400 years, something will crawl out of the water and begin life again.
Yes. So, it'll be sort of rapid, massive depopulation scenarios.
If we're going to talk about apocalypse on Gardul,
no.
We're not.
No, just in general.
I might have to dominate the next episode. Can I just bring in whatever I want about?
If it's about,
this is probably very close to my heart.
I think you'll enjoy this topic a lot. So you might end up dominating this one more than me. So.
Okay, that's fine. No, because what I was going to ask is if you're going to talk about it in the context, because the tease is the apocalypse of your world.
Yes, we want to destroy the rules, not mine.
Oh, not yours.
Yeah, that would be wrong.
Well, my point is, you've talked about that you've brought Gardul, you've had stories in Gardul that took place during the Space Age. So is obviously, I think the answer is no. You have never had an apocalypse planned in your world. Do you want to talk about it hypothetically, like if one were to occur, what it could be?
We want to talk about what they could be, either from something that we really enjoyed, aka Fallout 1, 2, or 3, or Fallout New Vegas, or or endless sea of zombie movies or disease-ridden movies. But also the fact that you could use any of these on a world if you wanted to create an apocalyptic setting.
Okay.
So it's really like, if I wanted to create an apocalyptic setting, I would destroy my world. Like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be fun. I'm excited already.
Yeah, no.
Can we make it a series? I could do a whole series on this.
We might have to.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And as always, make sure to go to Gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under Podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.